we still have a scarcity of competent individuals.
Think about what you are interested in and most passionate about, and then choose a pathway into that.
You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and step out your comfort zone.
Hello, and welcome to My Green Future, where we look at career planning through a green lens.
Today's conversation is with Girija Pande. Now, he used to be the head of APAC for TCS, the Indian conglomerate. But we talked to him in his role as a company director. He's on multiple boards, and we thought it'd be interesting to chat with him about what kind of future you should have as a board director, how you can plan to be a board director through a green mindset.
And I really liked how he was bringing the insights of how boards are starting to adjust and really make a commitment to sustainability, whether it's on climate change or on other topics.
So if you're thinking of going for a board role, then you'll want to listen to this one. Let's get into it. So today's guest is Girija Pande. He is the chair of the sustainability board of a company based out of Zurich called Chain IQ, but with a rich history of directorships and business experience. And now, Girija, you are a man of many portfolios. And the reason why we thought it'd be interesting to talk to you on today's program is because you're doing some really interesting work on representing environmental issues and environmental priorities at board level, which is not only a vitally important thing in getting companies to become more sustainable, but also is something that more and more people want to be prepared for and present themselves as. So we thought it'd be really interesting to get your sense of what it takes to be a board director, how you can represent ESG and sustainability issues at board level, and matters arising from all of that. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, wonderful to have you here. And you've got such an amazing career and history. So I thought we could start way back. You studied engineering at university the first time around,
yes,
I understand.
Yes, that's right.
Now, I also studied engineering, and I think there are some really interesting skill sets that come out of an engineering background, which apply throughout the rest of your career. And I can remember one of the things when I studied engineering that we were told is that, you are project managers. And I do find that to be a useful skill set, that you think this is where we need to go, but this is how you break it down into different steps. Can you tell me what are some of the lessons that you've taken with you from your engineering degree throughout your career?
Well, the way the engineering degree it works for you is it gives you a lot of disciplined thinking. Very disciplined thinking. And it applies then to everything else you did. After my engineering, I worked for some time and then I went on for a business, MBA course. But I always find that the engineering degree, whenever you're taking decisions or running companies, gives you a very good disciplined way of thinking. It frameworks it puts it very scientifically, and that's probably the advantage. The disadvantage, I always say, which the engineers have to learn, is a little bit of creativity. Otherwise, when you start boxing yourself in too many, so you need, over years, then you have to learn that, relearn a little bit of the creativity and design thinking.
Yes, that's very true. I think we had someone who studied law on the podcast recently, and they were talking about the skill sets that they have from law of being very thorough on the details, but also that creativity, I think, is particularly important in sustainability. I mean, how have you seen that creativity and the world of sustainability expand from when you first started your career?
See, when we first started, let me just run up and say, after my business career, active business career, I ran Asia Pacific for a very large technology company. But by that time, it was very clear that sustainability in various forms has started to come in. And the key is to find out you look beyond the horizon. I remember I started life in banking. And because at that time, international banking was growing, financial industry was growing globally. And I was in many parts of the world. And then you could see that technology was the next growth movement. So I moved into technology, and I ran technology. And then I realized that the next area where action will happen globally will be in this area of, it started with climate, then it started with good governance, and then it started with the social responsibility of business. And that's how ESG sort of finally made its sort of mark. And you could see it when you were dealing with your customers, you could see it when you were dealing with governments, you could see it when you were dealing with the wider public, that in some shape or the other, this issue is bound to come up because society is changing, climate is changing, and there are expectations of the corporate world which are changing. So this whole idea of the Milton Friedman story of, I only look after my profits and that's the expectation of shareholders is obviously changed.
You had a fairly unique perspective on this in the sense that the company that you mentioned was TCS, right?
Yes.
And Tata as an organization has its roots in this very kind of thing. So you had a very privileged position.
Correct. It was very easy to actually, because that was what the fundamental DNA of the company was. That, what comes from society goes back multiplied. And this was 150 years ago when the Tata family thought of it. So it was easy being there, and everyone believes in it. There is no debate on this issue. We've got to do something.
But did you find that you were an outlier in that sense? Because, like you say, the rest of the world at this point was living on the Milton Friedman doctrine that kind of thinking was anathema to proper business practice. But how did you find that dissonance between what Tata was doing and what was being accepted as general practice elsewhere?
Well, it's not that we were not delivering results for the shareholders, but we were not only focused on that. And I think the question was, how do you do both? And the DNA of the company is that we will do both. And I think they've delivered all the time. And the 90 odd companies, all of them have this mantra. Also remember that many of us have grown up personally in an environment where we believe that there is a social responsibility. It's not just because the corporate is telling you to do it. I strongly believe that there is a social responsibility for everyone. And you can't just take from society and not give back. So it takes many forms.
So we often find that people transition into sustainability or ESG roles because they want to have an impact. And it was interesting that you were just talking about social responsibility. Do you think in your role at Tata Consulting Services that you were really helping to drive that change, or were businesses coming to you trying to find out how to make an impact?
I think what we've realized that as we were doing this for our own teams, our customers were saying the same thing. And our customers were some of the large multinationals, global companies all over the place. And everyone was starting to move towards it. And they were quite happy to see a partner who thought like them. Actually, it was always a plus point for us when we actually told the Tata story. Because they said, okay, that's something which we want to do ourselves. So many times we actually ran courses for them on this and not on technology.
So in that sense, having the fundamental belief in the social impact and that social governance really did help the business.
Oh yes, it certainly helps the business. And of course, in the long run, it does, as we all have discovered now. But you're talking about 20 years ago when this was still new. But people were picking up because I think individually the managers and CEOs also have the same view. I think you rarely found a CEO who said, all I'll do is shareholder money and nothing else for society at large. I certainly have not seen such people. I have seen CEOs who are pretty committed. So it was there in individuals, maybe it was in the corporates.
So we want to talk about the role of directors in all of this and the increasing importance of director input into that kind of thinking. At Tata, presumably, there was a complete consonance between the CEO and the board at the same time. So that relationship was what helped drive the business proposal. How important do you think it is for that kind of relationship between CEO and board, and for the company's future, for the director level people to be on board with the ESG agenda?
So if you're looking at today, if we are bringing ourselves to what is happening today at the board levels, the compliance function on ESG is pretty high on all companies. I mean, there is a huge amount of regulations that have come in. It's already happening. And in fact, last year, regulations went up by 15%. Europe obviously leads the way in terms of regulating companies and what they must disclose, what they must report. So one is the reporting and compliance side of it, which has become quite onerous in some places. And the board is now saying, well, we've got to do it. So one is this view. The other is that the board gets, the company gets a benefit of being seen as a responsible citizen. Because three things are happening. Number one, your own Gen Z employees want to be seen in a company which is a responsible company. And they want to see you as a responsible social company, and they want to work with those companies. So if you want to avoid high level of attrition, especially keeping Gen Z, who are not easy to keep, you have to be seen to be doing something seriously. And they would do volunteering work in this area, so you got to really get them. The other area is your customers. Many customers feel strongly, especially the younger ones, right? And they are ready to pay what we call green premium, meaning they will pay you a little more if you are seen as, your products are seen as socially responsible, blah, 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 right? So there's a customer angle. And then there is the government and the society at large, which wants to see you doing something for the environment. So that all these three areas really impinge on what the directors can do and should do. And they are aware of it.
So I think we started to see that boards required one person who had sustainability skill sets, and that's when all of these regulations started to come out. But I'm starting to see a bit of a shift away from having just the one director with sustainability or climate change responsibility to a more overall approach. What are you seeing for boards as they look to either comply with the sustainability regulations or meet those stakeholder demands?
So I think it starts like that. It starts like someone at least should know a little more, because so many regulations are being, every day you're finding new regulations, you are interpreting them, what is allowed, what is not allowed. So that's the basic story. But what actually boards are saying in that discussion on strategy is, how does this impact us in the long term? Let's just take energy transition. It's a common topic. Energy transition in many ways will impact lots of companies. Whether you're a producer of energy, like an oil and gas company or a coal company, I mean, it's a serious issue. What are you going to do? You may have stranded assets, right? That's the debate that happens at the strategy level at the board.
Is that debate actually taking place, though?
Oh,
yes. I think part of the question at the moment is, if we're still living in that age of profit as a priority, then the board, how much influence are the board putting on the CEO to say, no, you need to change that and bring in a much longer term mentality into the operations of this company?
So the good, everyone's not doing it, but the good companies who are ahead in this are the ones who are actually, the incentives of the CEOs and senior management is being linked to performance on ESG indicators. That actually is the easiest way to figure out how serious they are on meeting their ESG targets. So CEOs are being put on that. And for every investor who wants to look at a company and say how ESG compliant they are, the best way is to find out what is the senior management incentive plan. And in an incentive plan, you will see parts of the incentive, long-term incentive, is linked to, so the boards are pushing that. The comp committees are pushing that. Is everyone doing it? No. But as I said, some of the areas, they're doing it. Now, if you take some of the companies which are really seriously impacted, so the energy companies are seriously impacted. You've seen the problems with BP and others, and legally also. So these are serious issues which are impacting the strategy of the company. So ESG comes in now from strategy perspective, because everyone is saying in the long term, we got a problem. Then you've got this other issue of the climate issue, right? In the sense that the variability of the climate, you've got a factory in an area which is flooded, or has a fire, or has a earthquake, or whatever. So what do we do about that? So it's no longer good for society, it's now also becoming good for the company to survive.
And do you think those conversations are being led by the board, or they should be? Because certainly from some of the board discussions I've been part of, sustainability and ESG is still a nice to have rather than mission critical. And yet from what you were describing, you're seeing that boards are seeing ESG as mission critical.
So it becomes mission critical. I agree with you. Not everyone is as committed, and they will sooner or later. You know, there's always the leading edge, and then always the fast followers. But if you look at it, take a bank. The bank today has a serious issue of stranded assets. They are under pressure all across the world. Are you financing coal? It starts like that. Are you financing oil and gas? What are you doing for energy transition? Are you pulling out? So there are, the other day I was hearing one of the long-term sovereign wealth funds, and they were saying, we are very clear. We will withdraw from companies who are not looking at the transition risk. We will withdraw. Now, if they, and they are the large, well, some of the large players, all the sovereign wealth funds and long-term players, if they start saying it, earlier it was only the Norwegian fund, if you remember, which used to say that. Now everyone else is saying it. And Temasek has been very active, GIC has been very active in this area, and so are others. So I think they are being pushed from all sides. So the boards will have to accept this view. So something as simple as in a bank, you have this problem. If you have an energy company, you got a problem. If you're a cement company, you got a problem. So, I mean, maybe there are some who are not yet going to be affected as much as the others.
So we're moving into an environment and into an age when the board itself, almost in its entirety, needs to transition its own thinking about these things.
Oh, yes.
So tell me how potential, putative board directors, people who want to become board directors, how should they be considering their positions? What do they need to know? How do they need to prepare themselves to be a board member in this new age?
So, a lot of people prepare for being a board member by attending these various professional programs, experience, etc., etc. But to add on to it now, the ESG knowledge, what is very clear to me is that not many people are that conversant. So there's a lot of material available. So what did I do many years ago when I first got into it? I started reading up, I started writing on it. And then you learn, because a lot of work is being done. And today, with the net and etc., there's so much of information available. So I would recommend people read a lot, listen to people. There are a lot of, ESG seminars are by the dozen nowadays.
Yeah, that's always part of the problem, isn't it? There's so much out there.
So much happening. So it's good to keep track. Also in colleges and degrees now you have environmental courses which didn't exist earlier. And today a lot of them are going through those. So there's a lot of material available, but you also need to keep pace with it because the change is happening so fast.
So there is a lot of material available, and I find some people are perhaps book smart, but not necessarily street smart. And I think you do need to get some experience in implementing some of these great ideas. What have you done in your career? How have you seen that really play out, where you need to get tangible experience to make the theory that you've learned actually applicable in real life?
Well, it happens slowly. It happens as you are implementing strategies. As long as you are aware that, certain strategies have impact on this area. They can have impact on good governance. They can have impact on social issues. They can have impact, of course, on the climate. Now it's much easier because you are measuring every year your carbon footprint, right, for a company. You got to disclose it, CDP, etc. So it's easier now to know what your impact is of the things that you're doing. I serve on a board of a company which is unlisted as yet, but we've been looking to list in New York. And we were having this debate, and then I said to someone, do you realize that if you haven't done your work on ESG, in the US today, the SEC criteria for listing on ESG is pretty severe. It's still in a draft stage, but I think it's going to go through. So if you haven't done that, you will have a serious problem with investors. You can't go in. So we actually postponed the IPO. And then the board said to me, well, you better look at this, what these guys are up to, and get us up to scratch.
Well, who knows if that'll survive a new Trump administration, but there's a whole different story.
That's
Sure.
how you learn,
Sure.
and that's how it happens.
Learn by doing.
But you've put together a specific board in your work, a specific board dedicated purely to the sustainability function of the particular company that you're working for, which is an interesting thing. So when you are putting together such a board, let's be practical. When you're saying, okay, I want to assemble a board of sustainability experts, what are you looking for in the interview process? When
we were interviewing people for this, so I had decided that we should have outsiders and not board members, the existing board members into it, and because then we would give an independent view to the board rather than having one board director is also doubling up.
Outsiders to the industry or
outsiders of the board,
okay,
or the company, right? So we said, and they accepted it. I think they're very, very clear on that. And so we said, okay, we need people who have experience in this. So number one, we should have one of your major customers who is dealing with this issue as a customer, ESG issue. So we should have them. So we got one of them to come over. Then a lot of issues are around carbon credits today, because companies are trying to sort of figure out how to, reduce the impact of their own carbon footprint. So we went to, we went to Cambridge where they have a Center for Carbon Credits. It's called C4, Cambridge Center for Carbon Credits. And we asked one of the ladies who's very responsible there to join us. She's very good. She understands this, what is happening, how do we price it. And they're wanting to make London into a carbon center, trading center. Then we wanted a kind of a professor who had built an ESG system, both technology as well as committed to ESG. So we looked around, we found one of them in Switzerland itself. And he's built an ESG system which does all the calculations of carbon footprints, etc., of small and medium industry. Because we have 30,000 suppliers in that company. So we needed someone who understands the small and medium industry.
So what you're saying is you went looking for specific skill sets.
We decided what we will have. Then we said, where do we find them? Then you rung around and sort of talk to people. And
so is that advice that you would give to potential board directors to say specialize in one particular discipline? Or do you think a generalist approach is also useful?
I think specialist is a useful one because the 3 or 4 of us now form a core of people. When we discuss, we just had a big board meeting in Zurich. It was a pleasure because everyone is bringing something to the table. And I suppose it was my role to put it all together. And so I think it's useful to have specialists as well. And of course, you have to have a generalist who then puts it together for the board.
But I think then we're looking at some different models. So if it's the main board, particularly for a listed company, you often hear that they look for people who have more than just one skill set. It's not only deep expertise, but that's for the management of the board of a company. What I'm starting to see is these, what I'll call sustainability advisory panels, which perhaps report to the board maybe once a year. And maybe the chairperson of that panel reports to the board. But then you can actually have the deep technical expertise on this sustainability advisory panel that maybe you wouldn't have on the main board. And I'll give an example. I am the chair of an impact committee for a company, and I'm independent and I'm the chairperson, report to the board once a year, but there is a representative from the customer base, there's a representative from the financial base, there is an NGO representative, there are some of the executives on that panel, and then you can have those deep technical discussions on maybe it's carbon credits, maybe it is on animal welfare, but you can go in very deep and then provide that advice to the main board. And I think that's a really interesting distinction that we're starting to see in the market.
So this is what we had done in this. The main board is doing whatever they do, and then they ask this advisory board, which has been created, to provide them the inputs into that discussion. So as a chair, I send them the details.
So do you see this as being a model that eventually will become the basic model for future interaction and activity?
There's a good chance of it becoming one because I think the responsibility of the boards are so many today. They have huge amounts of responsibility they carry. As it is, the material for the board is like that. So it's not that they can do a real, you need to have a separate, it's like many other issues, like say an issue of cybersecurity. It's a major issue for the board, any board today, right? So you need to have someone who's good at that. Then there is a whole technology story that goes on. Then there is a HR story. So boards have a lot of issues to worry about,
obviously.
including the main strategy, of course.
I'm just wondering, I mean, from both of your perspectives, being on boards and being the sustainability person on that board, whether there is a model evolving that eventually will lead to greater board awareness and action with a sustainability lens on it, or do you think we're still in a very Wild West kind of situation?
I think there's both, because I have been on a listed company board, but that company had a very strong sustainability focus. So yes, I was there for sustainability, but also for my knowledge of Asian markets and supply chains. This is what I mean, that there's a plurality of skills that are usually needed to be on a main company board. And then I've had the experience of being on a sustainability advisory board where those deep technical skills are probably more required. And I think there's probably demand for both.
I think what will happen is that as the sustainability agenda becomes more complex and complicated, boards will probably start having to have these kind of advisory panels rather than just one person responsible for it, because it's not that easy to do it. You're not going to find one person who is a know-all and everything in ESG. It's just getting too complicated.
So let's get back to the issue of, okay, so if that is the future landscape of board level activity, what of those people who want to be part of that landscape? You talked about the amount of information is out there and how people should become informed. Can you give us a sense of perhaps the most robust path to pursue in seeking that information? I mean, are there particular institutions, particular methodologies that potential directors should be thinking about? Are there educational qualifications that are necessary to go there?
I think if you can get an educational qualification on sustainability, there are lots of courses. It used to be environmental engineering. Now they've moved on to many other areas, the wider area of the whole ESG.
You think they're all the same sort of thing? I mean, I know the Singapore Institute of Directors is now...
Yes, SID is doing that. SID is doing it, and many other institute directors are doing the same thing, because it is becoming more and more, it's like one of those pre-qualifying thing that you have to have some sense of this. Like you have to have sense of compliance issues, the corporate governance code, and all the things which a director is supposed to know. You have to have a very good sense of this whole ESG. So that, in any case, is like a base level issue. But you have to have a little more than that, because this is an evolving story. And it's evolving pretty fast, let me say that to you. As the world gets hotter and hotter, last year was the hottest year in history.
Last month was that.
This is going to be a panic button sooner or later.
So one of the things that I'm sure we all get asked, but I'm sure you get asked, is, what should someone do when they're starting out their career and they want to go into ESG? And you were giving us an anecdote before we came online of some advice you gave someone. Can you tell us that story again?
Yes, that was an interesting one, because I was... So one of the youngsters who came out of SMU had an option of going into a bank and an option of going into one of the World Wildlife Funds and those kind of things. And he was obviously, I think his background had been in finance, so he was obviously moving towards joining a bank. It was a branded one. So obviously it made sense for him. So he came to ask me for advice. And I said to him, your age, if I were you, I would join the World Wildlife Fund. Believe me, yes. 10 years later, you'll thank me for it. 1 year later, he started thanking me for it. But his dad, who I also knew very well, was quite upset as to why I had sent his son to a non-profit rather than a bank. So I can see this dichotomy. I can see the problem people face. But if you are looking at a future career, this is a great place to learn. I mean, he's not going to stay there forever. He's going to move after having learned a lot more on this whole area. So it's a great place to start. I mean, you're not going to be there all the time, but I mean, it gives a great grounding.
Great place to get experience, isn't it?
And
I know when I started out at an Environment Protection Authority, and being surrounded by other people who are working on environmental issues, it's a great learning environment.
Yeah, and you're constantly learning because it's evolving, and then you are part of it. So yes, I would recommend that too. I have recommended to many people like that. They're mid-career professionals who are looking to change. And whenever they say, what else can I do? Earlier it used to be, okay, technology or, one of those areas. Now it's actually sustainability.
I can just picture any number of tiger mums around the world tearing their hair out as they listen to this.
Yes. The tiger mums don't come to me. Their sons or daughters who come to me.
So just to round off then, I mean, let's go back to that position where you, as an experienced and long-term business person and board member, are interviewing for a board position. What are the 3 questions you would ask in order to ensure that an applicant was sufficiently aware of all these issues to be on a board?
Well, certainly, if the questions were going to be around how much of the ESG issues which the board faces is he or she aware of, then I'll certainly question a lot of areas in all the 3 ESG areas. I mean, they're all as important, although the climate and the sustainability side takes the first sort of cut. And I think the issue which they will have to first know is what are the regulations which impact this? And there are many, and they are changing. So that's the first issue. And that itself is a complex issue. It took me a long time to figure out what GRI was doing, what ISSB was doing, and how the both of them are doing it or not correctly. So that's one debate. And then there's a lot of debate in that. So you have to follow the conversation that is happening. Then on the whole area of social and impact on society, this area of double materiality, as I call it. Impact of climate on the company and the impact of climate on the impact of the company on the climate. Both happen simultaneously. So he or she should be aware of that and how much they've done it. And then, of course, this, which all directors are supposed to know, the governance code, what is expected of you by the local authorities wherever the company is listed or registered, and the whole area. Earlier it was only the governance side which we used to talk about, right? Today you've just moved to social on one side and environment on the other side. So the 3 things that you got to know now.
Fantastic. Girija, pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Thanks for watching. Now, the whole purpose of this series is to be able to inspire others to take action to make their careers more green and to think about how they can influence the green agenda within the companies that they already work for. And I hope if you are inspired at all, then you'll get in touch and engage with us a bit.
Now, we know just from speaking with all of our guests that this can sometimes be a minefield. It's hard to know where to start, what are the best courses, what are the best sources of information. So if you'd like to get in contact, please email us on the email below or contact us through LinkedIn.
And if you have any thoughts about kind of subjects you'd like to hear us discuss or people or industries that you'd like featured on the conversation, let us know about that as well. Get in touch.
Thank you.